this is going to be a video on assembling uppers for a pair of shoes or boots, and this is going to be a pair of Chukka boots, which are very similar to a derby. So I'm going to talk you through it as I go along. Here's the pattern pieces. Very simple, as you can see, so it should be an easy enough one to follow along with. Somebody requested a guide for where you cut your leather out and which pieces to put where, so I thought I'd show you this. But this is in an ideal world, which I'll explain later why you can kind of almost disregard this. So this is a full hide of a cow. Generally you'd buy it in a side, which is half of it down this dotted line, so that would be a side. And generally the best parts of the leather are what you see called the bend here, and from there you would generally cut the vamp and the toe cap and the quarters. They're generally your better parts, and then your poorer parts are generally the edges here, they're like the belly of the cow. And you really only want to take the tongues. You don't want to take too much from here. I've put welts on there, but I just buy my welts. In terms of the stretch, it tends to stretch side to side, so outwards, and it is tighter lengthways. You don't really need to get too caught up on where you take your cuts from, and I'll explain why now. So here's a side of leather that I've previously used. I think I've got 2 or 3 pairs out of this so far, and it's still quite large, as you can see. If you can see there in the top right, there's some toe caps. You see there, some toe caps cut out. So it's down the centre, down this straight line is generally your best piece of leather to cut out. So that's where you want your toe caps and vamps, because that's the part of the shoe that takes the most strain, that bends the most. So you want that to be the best part. And the reason why you don't need to worry too much about where you cut your leather from, as long as you avoid the belly for your vamps and your toe cap, is you'll have this problem. You'll end up with quite a small amount left, and this is just enough to make a pair of boots. I'm just going to have to fit it on as best as I can, and so I can't take the perfect piece of leather necessarily every time. And you want to reduce waste as much as you can, so you want to use as much of the leather as you can. But I'll show you what you should really be doing when picking out the parts of leather to cut from. So you want to look out for any blemishes, any cuts, any holes, any insect bites on the top surface of the leather. And as you can see here, there's this, I don't know, weird stretchy part. So we kind of want to avoid using that. If I flipped over the leather, this is the stretchy part that we didn't want to cut from. The fibres are quite loose there, they're almost hairy. And you compare it to that way, it's quite solid. Quite compacted here, quite dense, quite hairy. You want to kind of avoid this for your vamp. That's a good way of testing. If you've done as I've done previously and you can't tell because you've cut out various bits from your hide which bits are ideal to cut from, turn it over and have a look on the other side. You'll be able to tell, and it might be a bit stretchier at that end. The looser grain kind of want to avoid. There's my vamp and my tongue. I'm going to put a heavy object on top of it. This is just an old tin filled with nails that I use for lasting. And then I'm going to go around it, and I'm going to use, this is silver pen, and it rubs off really easily. And if you struggle to get it off, if you just wet it a little bit, it should rub off pretty easily. But I would test it out on a scrap piece of leather before you use it. Now I tend to do each piece individually and then cut it out rather than draw them all on at the same time, just because the silver pen does tend to rub. So if you catch it, it might rub out a little bit. So now I'm going to cut it out, and I'm just using a standard Stanley knife. It has been sharpened a lot, that's why it's got a bit of a curve on it. But it is just a standard Stanley knife, so don't worry about the curve on it. The only thing to remember with this is try to keep your knife vertical, so that when you cut it, you have as close to a 90-degree edge as you can here, rather than coming along and slicing it like sideways, which is very easy to do, especially when you're going around corners. And you see how it's kind of left non-90 degrees there. Yeah, try and keep it as vertical as you can. Quite difficult when you're going around a corner, but you get used to it quite quickly. Now the patterns I make are all symmetrical because I use the mean form method of doing it, which means that the quarters, I only need one pattern piece for the quarters, But when you're cutting it out, just remember you need 2 this way up and 2 this way up. And that's the majority of it cut out. I still haven't done the back strip, but we'll come on to that a bit later. And now we're going to do some skiving. So let's see the pattern. So this is the vamp. And that's going to go underneath our quarters. Get the right one. That's going to sit on top. So but we want to skive underneath here. With this quarter, what I'm going to do is I am actually going to skive all around the edge, because I'm going to fold it over the entire way around. So this entire edge is going to be skived, folded over, glued down, and then stitched in. So these are basically the knives I use. I've got Japanese skiving knife, another Japanese skiving knife, which is the first one I ever got. I got it dirt cheap on Amazon. It's not very good. It's stainless steel, hence why I've got a good one now. Don't use this one anymore, so I'll put it to the side, but you can get it very cheaply on Amazon. So Japanese skiving knife, a lining skiving knife from George Barnsley as well. Very, very good. Skiving lining and thinner levers is harder than skiving thicker levers, which seems counterintuitive, but is true. And then I've got this, which is like a French edging knife. This is a 4mm one. If that one doesn't work on the lining, then I resort to that one. It only takes off a tiny little bit at a time, hence I don't use it very often on the skiving. I use it when doing the insoles or the midsoles, as you'll see in my videos, but yeah, don't tend to use that one. I will do if I need to, but primarily use this one and this one for skiving. Now we've got a 1 centimetre overlap, so I've drawn it on. I don't tend to draw it on, but it just should help you visualise where the lever is going to lap over. But really we just want to reduce this edge, this cut, to basically paper thin essentially. So I'm not going to show you how to sharpen either. There's plenty of places on the internet that show that. So I got 2 sides to your knife. I tend to use this side, and you do lots of different methods, and you'll see them on my channel. You can go along the line like this and then try and get underneath it. It depends on your lever. This one's quite a soft lever. I can just come along it. Don't even need to do that. It's with the lining skiving knife. Just come along it. And we're just looking for it to basically taper away to nothing. So this is one of the quarters. And as you can see, I've skived along the edges, and I've drawn a line 5mm from the edge, apart from down here. And what we're going to do is we're going to fold at that line, create a folded edge. Now it'll depend on how thick your lever is and how hard your lever is in terms of how far you'll have to skive and how deep you'll have to skive. This one's fairly easy. You can just go along and test it. If you can do that with your fingers, it's good enough. And then the reason it's a bit further away from the edge here, in order to maintain the shape of the quarters on each one, I'll do 5mm here, 5mm here, 5mm along the straight lines, and then I'll just use another quarter that hasn't been folded yet, and I use that as the pattern piece. So I'll line up the edge there, line up the edge on the bottom, and then follow the guide there, and it should mean that we have the same quarters each time, because that can be tricky when you're folding these edges to make sure that they're all even. I'm going to go along the edge, and I'm going to fold it at the line, and I'm going to hit it with a hammer. It can be quite difficult to maintain a straight edge when you're folding over here, and it's not so important on a derby or on a Chukka boot like this. On an Oxford, you really want to maintain a straight edge down here. So what I'm going to do on the straight parts here, I'm going to stick a piece of ribbon along the line I've drawn it, which will help me when I'm folding it over, and it'll also prevent stretch on the shoe, especially where your foot goes in and along the lacing area. So just get it, pull it tight, line it up on the line. There you go. And you just have to leave that to dry properly, because when we fold it over, we're going to put glue on top of it, and if it's not dried, it'll just come up. Now I've glued it, and I'm just going to go over it and fold it down. Tap it with a hammer as I go along. I'm going to do that around every edge, but I'm just going to ignore the corners for now. Now I've left the corners till the end, and the reason is, well, with Chukkas it's not going to be too bad, but you see how when I fold it over I've got that, it's bumped up there. Now these curves aren't very sharp, these aren't very sharp curves. If you do it on an Oxford or a Derby, and you have here, it's going quite a sharp curve. So to get it to lay flat, you need to take a little bit of material out. So what you can do is where you take note of where it is, a little bump, and you might have to do this several times, and then just cut a little triangle out. Don't go up to the edge. Just get a little triangle out, and it'll lay flat a bit. Maybe you need to do a little bit more on this side. And eventually it'll start to lay flat, and then you can just go along and do it there. Like I say, with the Chukka it shouldn't be too bad, but when you've got a sharper curve, it's a bit harder to do it. That's all four done now, and now what I do normally is turn them inside out and then stitch along this line here, kind of like this pair, and then turn them back the other way around, kind of like that, and then flatten that out with a hammer and then put a back stitch along it. But I'm going to show you a different way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use a sewing machine. I'm going to put the holes in down here, but I'm not going to put any thread in it, and then I'm going to hand stitch them together. And what that'll do is it'll butt the edges together, and it's called a butt stitch. Now what I've done here, I've put a very thin layer of glue in between them here, maybe up to like a millimetre along this edge, and that's just because this machine wants to move the lever, so no matter how much you clip it, it's going to try and shift it. So I'm going to put the holes in now. Now if you don't have a sewing machine, you can punch these holes in by hand, or you can use an awl. It's absolutely fine to do that, but it's just quicker doing it on the machine. This is the one I've done prior to doing this, and this is with the stitch I've done. So there's a cross on that side, and there's straight lines on the inside. Hopefully once you've sewn the quarters together, you'll have this curve. If you don't have this curve, you've done the pattern wrong. You don't want it to be a straight line. And we're going to put a back strip over the back of it because it's not a very strong stitch, this. And there's the other one, and I'm just going to put it on the back of the last, and I'm just going to tap it to flatten it out a little bit. Only gently though. Now we're going to cut out the back strip, so we're just going to measure up the length of it with a tape measure. So it's about 20 centimetres, 19 centimetres to the top, but we also want to wrap it around here, just so we cover this at the top. So I'm probably going to make it 22 centimetres long, and I'm going to do it 22 centimetres long, 2.5 centimetres wide at the top, and 3 centimetres wide at the bottom. So here's the back strip, and it's going to go over the top here and fold over like that. So we need to skive this down. So we need to skive this down to nothing, at about 1.5 centimetres. So how I do it, I mark on at the centre there, at the top, and at the centre of the bottom there. Flip it round, fold it over, see where the line is, and I'll put a clip on there. Then what I'll do is I'll put a thin layer of glue up here, glue it down, clip it on at the bottom, wait for that glue to dry, then I'll take the clip off the top and then glue on at the top as well. So that's now stuck down, and we're now going to stitch it on. And we're going to draw the stitch lines on. You can use one of these. You can get them on Amazon. They have interchangeable bits where you can change that section, and you can change how far in and how far out it is. We're just going to draw. You can, if you don't have one of these, you can just draw on with a ruler on the straight edge. I've gone over it in silver pen as well, just to make it easy to see. And when I stitch in, I'll do 2 stitches. And then I'll go backwards over the 2 stitches and then come forward again. Now the back strip is stitched on, and I'm just going to tap it with a hammer a bit firmer to encourage it to lay flat. A bit of a tension around here and just go around the edges like that. You want it to curve around here. It's especially important with the shoe, but obviously it's a boot, so it's going to be up here anyway. So, also when you're hammering in, hammer in the actual stitches as well. Now, just before I attach the lining along the edge, I'm going to put in some reinforcing here, which will reinforce the lacing area. And I've just taken a scrap piece of leather. I've roughed it up. On the side I'm going to stick down. And then, that's not that one from there, but and I'm going to stick it in. And it's skied flat around the edges, so you won't be able to see it from the outside. It's just a reinforcing piece. Now I'm going to cut out the lining, and I'm just going to use the pattern from the Vamp and Tongue for that part. And I've cut out a piece of paper. It's in my Oxford pattern tutorial how to do that. But as you'll see, it's really just a rough fit because we're going to trim it once it's attached. But if you just put it in and line it up as though it's on the shoe, so don't keep it flat when you do it, and just have a look, and it should overlap on pretty much every edge. When you've cut out the lining, make sure you skive where all the seams will be. So what I've done there is I've pegged the lining into the upper. I fold it over and I start in the centre, and I peg that and then work my way out and make sure I've got an overlap around the outside which I can cut off of the lining. And also making sure that the gap, the lining between the lining and the upper here isn't too big. I mean, this is quite a stretchy lining, so it should be fine. But we will have another piece of leather in there that's stiffen it later. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove these pegs because they'll hold it in position. And then I'm going to put a line of glue on the inside along here, which will mean that I can then, once that dries, I can lift the upper up and put the eyelets just on the inside. If you're happy with the eyelets showing on the outside, you don't need to do that. You can just glue all the way along the edge and then punch your holes in through both of them and then put your eyelets in, but obviously you won't be able to lift it up then. Hopefully the glue has dried, so I'll take the pegs off. So what I'm doing now is I'm just checking, make sure it's pretty smooth on the inside, which it is. And I'm just checking to make sure I still have my overlap here and here. Put some pegs back on here just to make sure it's secure while I put the punch the eyelet holes out. While I was waiting for it to glue, I made a template of just the front half of this quarter, transfer the holes using silver pen, and then I'll punch them out. Once you've drawn the holes on, just make sure they line up like that. Re-put the pegs on just to make sure this piece of leather doesn't move now. And I'm going to use this as a punch to punch out. I also have this, which I prefer using, but it doesn't go up to 5mm, and I'm doing a 5mm hole this time. I've put an eyelet in on this side. This little circle goes on the other side. Different tool. And that's now attached. And we're going to repeat the process for all of them. There you go, they're all done. And now we just need to check, make sure they all line up, which they should do. And then I'm just going to put some glue down and stick it on. There you go, completely lined up. Now I'm going to stitch in around here now. Just a tip when you're stitching, if you have a sewing machine like this, you want to basically start, imagine that the shoe is in front of you, start on the left hand side, because then the majority of the material isn't going into the centre. If you did it on the other way, you'll have the bottom going in and it gets awkward. When you're sewing up an Oxford along this edge, so along this edge, when you're sewing in this edge, start on the left hand side as you're looking at it, because then only the vamp points in. If you do it the other way, you're going to have your heel pointing in, you have to force it under and everything. Another tip, once you get into the back strip, or any point of leather where you're adding on, going from one layer to another layer of leather, this machine might struggle to do it. So what you need to do is just lift up the presser foot and do the stitch manually. That can also be an issue when you're coming along this edge on an Oxford, and you're not adding any leather there, but the tongue is underneath here, and it doesn't like it when it's on the underside either. So you'll feel the machine not want to move it there. So you just have to do a couple of manual stitches there, and also at this point as well with that little thing. Then I'm just going to trim off the excess leather. I'm going to use a pair of scissors for this, but you can use a knife as well. I'm going to stick the lining at the tongue to the vamp, and then I'm going to stitch that in there. So I've got my vamp with my lining stitched in around the tongue, and I've got my quarters, and now we just need to combine the two. And so I recommend starting on the left side, as I've said before, so with your shoe facing away from you, the left side. So we're going to do that side first. What you'll have to do with like a derby shoe is you'll need to cut up the lining and do like a vertical, like with a pair of scissors, just so you can slot it on there. What I've done is I've done a cut up there, and then I can just slot on there. So if I show you on the inside, got the lining from the quarters going over the top of this. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stick it all down. There you go. And I'll stitch both quarters up before attaching the other side. And I'm going to stitch it on, and I always start in the centre and work my way out. There you go, there's that stitched, and I'm just going to repeat the process on the other side. There you go, 2 Chukka boots sewn up. I'll hopefully eventually do the midsole and the insole, but it won't be on this pair because that's taken quite a long time to do, recording it.